Okay, chapter 3, 4, and 5. We see kind of a little bit of a low point of humanity. You know, I like to think of these people and all people, adults, they're children just in larger bodies. And we see this being played out here at this lavish party that Count Rostov can't afford to pay, and Nikolai's there, Dolokhiv's there, Pierre's there. And it's just not a great display of humanity. Just the egos, the confusions, the simplicity of their sort of loyalties and ideas. It's a little bit of a low point. And it's a low point again for Pierre, as it seems that Dolokhov and his wife Ellen have had an affair, and he becomes convinced of this. He challenges Dolokhov to a duel, and the next day they meet to proceed. There's Rostov and Denisov on the Dolokhov team, and there's Nesvetsky on Pierre's side. And the whole thing, all these chapters, it's kind of a depressing read, just seeing the behavior of these men. But it's just here at the end that there's this sort of critical turning point, and just the writing itself. This is, you know, I read these chapter 3, 4, but it's then right at the end of chapter 5 that is the reward in the way the writing is, and I appreciate it so much. They're having this duel, and Pierre, he's fumbling with his gun. He's not at all capable with this, and just by sheer whim of coincidence and luck, he shoots, or unlucky, and he hits Dolokhov, and he injures him quite badly. And Dolokhov's staggering, but he also gets a free shot. And Nesvetsky says, cover yourself with your pistol, sideways, turn sideways, make yourself smaller. You have to stand there by the rules of this gentlemanly sort of thing. But he's just pleading with him, you know, cover yourself. Even Denisov could not help shouting, though he was the adversary in this circumstance, cover yourself. And Pierre, with his gentle smile of compassion and remorse, stood defenseless before Dolokhov, his legs and arms spread wide, his broad chest directly facing him. He looked at him sorrowfully. Denisov, Rostov, and Nesvetsky closed their eyes. At the same instant they heard the shot, and Dolokhov's wrathful cry. Missed, cried Dolokhov, and he sank feebly face down in the snow. Pierre clutched his head and turned away. He strode off through the deep snow, mumbling incoherently. It almost seemed like this was, you know, it was a rash decision, and he's just been overwhelmed by being Count Bezukhov. People are taking advantage of him, manipulating him, and in his good-hearted nature, he just can't help but putting his foot in the wrong situation. He doesn't have the strength, the self-confidence, and he finds himself here. And again, even here, even though it's kind of like, oh, Pierre, come on, man. And then even here at this moment, he's wounded Dolokhov, and he's just like, it just reminds me of Andre, just having this clarity of the clouds. It's kind of like, why did I not see this before? Pierre is here, and just that compassionate, sorrowful demeanor, which is so characteristic of him, rises to the surface again. And he offers himself to Dolokhov, you know, shoot me. He doesn't seem like he feels himself any more righteous or better than any man, sort of in this point. It's kind of like, it's just, I'm confused. It's almost like a sort of suicide in a way, it seems to me. It's kind of like, please, have your best shot. Thinking and knowing, and Denisov thinks, and Rostov thinks, and Nestor thinks, you know, they're covering their eyes. Okay, this is the end. He's dead. And Dolokhov, being injured himself, is not able to steady himself and misses. And it's almost you get a sense it's almost a disappointment for Pierre, and he goes off. And then to top it off, we get this completely 180 glimpse into Dolokhov. He is not a complete monster. And this is what I really like about the writing, and how even this character, up until now, we've really had not a lot great to appreciate about him, except here. In the sledge, Dolokhov lay silent, his eyes closed, not saying a word. But as they entered Moscow, he suddenly came to, and lifting his head with effort, took Rostov, who was sitting by him, by the hand. Rostov was struck by the totally altered, unexpectedly exalted, tender expression on Dolokhov's face. "My friend," said Dolokhov, gasping, "where are we?" "In Moscow, I know. Doesn't matter. But I have killed her. She won't get over this. She won't survive." "Who?" asked Rostov. "My mother. My angel, my adored, angelic mother." And Dolokhov pressed Rostov's hand and began to weep. You know, here was someone just in these few chapters we've just kind of been trained to very much dislike. And yet here too is just a man. Here too is just a small boy confused. Conditions conspired to have him be take on the persona of this kind of ruffian, thug, selfish fellow. But it's just the character he has taken on to survive, not knowing any other, not knowing what else to do. When he was a little calmer, he explained to Rostov that he lived with his mother, who, if she were to see him dying, would not survive it. He implored Rostov to go to her and prepare her. Rostov went on ahead to carry out his wish. You know, this doesn't erase any of the criticisms we might have of Dolokhov or his behavior or any of these guys' behavior, but it just goes to show once again, I think it's just, to me, it's a clarity just to think of, again, adults of any age. They're just, in almost all cases, they're just still small children, fearful little boys and girls, either lashing out, defending themselves, doing their best to find their way, and often being confused as to what's the best way forward, without guidance, as Pierre, we see, very much so. But even these self-confident men like Dolokhov, they're really no better off or wiser or more capable than Pierre. You know, they find a method to be, which for a time manipulates circumstance so that maybe life is a bit easier for them, but they're not any smarter. You know, it's kind of just good fortune in a way, or bad fortune, depending on how you think of it. But to Rostov's great surprise, he learned that Dolokhov, this bullying, brawling Dolokhov, lived in Moscow with an old mother and a hunchback sister, and was the most affectionate of sons and brothers. So this really stood out to me. Not that I'm cheering Dolokhov on, but I just, again, really like this glimpse into people as being not just people to cheer for or cheer against, or, you know, villains or heroes. You know, it's both at different times or at the same time. And this is how very much how compassionately we could view ourselves. Certainly, if you knew all my bad motives and thoughts, you wouldn't think too highly of me. If you glimpsed only the good things, you'd think I was a saint, and really it's both, right? And some things are more visible within different people, and some things are hidden. Some of these aspects are hidden, so we never really have the full picture. And again, it's not withholding praise to anyone who deserves it or blame to anyone who deserves it, but it's life is a much more nuanced and complex thing, and serves me just as a default to try to be gracious, both with myself and others. But anyway, with Pierre, it's just kind of been a hard slog here with Pierre, seeing him struggle. It seems like this might be a potentially important moment. So it was almost like a suicide just narrowly missed in a way. And really curious to see how this plays out as we go forward.